Okay, so I haven't posted any videos of the Tekno SCT410.3 recently, although I have been running it quite a lot over the past few months. In short, I really like this truck. This is a lot of fun to drive, and it is miles better than the Team Associated SC10 4x4 that I used to use for four-wheel drive short course. This truck has basically reignited my interest in four-wheel drive short course. It doesn't always have the greatest drivers in that class, at least, where I happen to race. But just driving the chassis is fun enough for me that I don't really care who else is driving in the class. Um, so it's a great truck. I haven't broken any parts, with the exception of the servo horn. Servo horn that they give you with the kit is pretty weak. A lot of people use the aluminum servo horn that Tekno makes. I think it's a Tekno horn for this chassis. I just use the high tech servo horns that come with the high tech servos. These are actually quite durable, and if put this screw through the correct hole in the horn, it fits like perfectly. So there's really no problem there, and I have a whole bunch of these as spares if I happen to break them, but I haven't broken a single one yet, so that's fine. As far as the drivability goes, I know that I think in one of my either the initial impressions video or the follow-up video where I talk a little bit about setup, I talked about how the nose tends to dive going off of certain jumps, and some of the running videos I posted for this truck during the indoor season happened to show that. And the truck, off of certain jump faces at the right angle, on power, the nose would scrape the face of the jump, and then the truck would, the nose would drag going off the jump, and the truck would nosedive. And this is a known problem with this Tekno platform. And I, did a little bit of searching about what people have done to resolve that problem, and more or less, you get the expected answers. Some of which I had considered myself, like running stiffer front springs, for example. That's a very common or obvious potential solution to the problem to keep the nose from diving down. Other interesting ideas people have proposed is to, I think, Dremel out this piece here so you can push the battery a bit further backward to push the weight backward a little bit. Running a larger pinion gear so that when you're in the air, even though the car is nose diving, when you're in the air, you flip the throttle, the wheels will go faster, and you use a gyroscopic effect to level the truck out quicker. So the pinion gear doesn't really resolve the problem of the nose dragging the jump faces. It just gives you a way of dealing with that fact while in the air. I haven't tried the battery mod. I don't think it's necessary. I haven't even tried using different springs. The initial thing I tried to do was to just increase the ride height, and that certainly solved the problem. Because the higher the truck rides, the more the truck has to squat or dive at the front end for the nose to scrape the jump face. The problem, as you might expect, is when you increase the ride height, now the roll moment becomes larger. And so the truck is more likely to roll from side to side and forward to backwards. So on, really fast, tight corners, a tall ride height doesn't really help you. It hurts you. It makes the truck very wobbly, very hard to control. So I tried to think of other ways to address this nosediving issue. And when I was looking at some of the Tekno documentation that they have on their website, and they basically posted the same thing on the SCT410.3 thread on RC Tech, they talked about the hinge pin inserts. And this is for most people, this would be a non-obvious solution, because on most kits that you would buy, whether it's like a 1/10 scale two-wheel drive buggy or a four-wheel drive buggy, or even, some of the other kits out there like a trucks and so forth, they don't really give you much of an opportunity to play around with the hinge pin inserts. You just get, a hinge pin mounting block for the front and rear, and it's kind of fixed, and you just use that and you go with it for both the front and the rear arms. But on kits like this, for example, which is more like a 1/8 scale kit, they give you all these inserts for the front and rear hinge pins. The Kyosho Laser ZX6 also does that, and that's something that I actually plan on playing around with a lot during this outdoor season. But getting back to this, apparently one of the ways you can use those inserts is to adjust what is called arm sweep. What arm sweep means is if we look top down, so this is the front of the chassis, this is the rear of the chassis. If I have front arm sweep, I'm basically making the front arms tilt inward toward the center of the chassis. Now, I think different people might use different nomenclature for what is a positive arm sweep or a negative arm sweep. If I remember the Tekno documentation correctly, their orientation is that if the arms sweep more inwards toward the center line of the chassis, that's less sweep. And then if you pull the arms back like this, that's more arm sweep. So this would be like positive sweep, negative sweep. Point being, if you sweep the arms forward, okay, by doing that, you can either take the inserts on the front rear inner hinge pin mount and find inserts that have holes that go to the outside, so that makes the hinge pin go at an angle like this, and or on the front hinge pin insert, use an insert that pushes that hole inward toward the center of the chassis to push the hinge pins more at an angle like this, so that the front faces more toward the center of the chassis. That gives you arms sweeping toward the front, and what that does is it changes the angle of the dog bone relative to the wheel axle. Okay, and what happens is, apparently, as the arm sweeps forward, my interpretation of it, and it might not be perfectly accurate, is that the wheel axle is going to try to align itself to the angle of the dog bone. Okay, and by doing that, if the arms are swept forward, then the dog bone does this, and the wheel axle is doing this. And so the wheel axle wants to line up, so it's going to try to push forward. And as it's pushing forward, it can't really go anywhere because it's locked into the bearings, into the caster block. But that force is still there, so it's going to push forward into the caster block, into the suspension arms. And since the arms are kicked up, right, if you look across the chassis this way, the arms have a certain amount of kick up. This forward force here is going to push the arm down. So when you apply power to the drivetrain, with the arms swept more forward, okay, that's going to push the arms down on acceleration. It's going to cause the nose to lift when you get on power, okay? Likewise, if you push the arms or sweep the arms backward, the dog bone to wheel axle angle is the opposite. So that's going to result in the force on the arm going in the other direction. So that's going to pull the arm up rather than push it down. So if the arms are swept backwards this way, it'll cause the nose to drop under while on power. If the arms are swept forward, it'll cause the nose to lift while on power. So typically on like a bumpy surface, especially, and especially for this chassis where you have this nose diving issue where the nose is digging into the jump face and causing it to drag off of a jump, running a bit more arm sweep toward the front will help the nose lift up while on power, because typically you'd approach a jump while on power. So just that little bit of extra nose lifting up while you get on power as you take off over a jump will keep the nose from dragging the jump face. So all I did was I just looked in the bag of spare parts that they give you, and I found for the front, well, I mean they're all the same size for the front and rear, but on the front I'm using these 2 dot inserts where the second dot is toward the inside of the chassis. Okay, I think the stock insert that you use for the standard setup is just a single dot right at the center. So this particular insert's a different one. You can get it, it's on the parts tree in the kit, and it just pushes that hole for the front inner hinge pin mount a little bit more toward the center of the chassis. So that makes the arms sweep forward a little bit, okay? And this will give you a little bit more on-power lifting of the nose, and likewise when you get on the brakes, when you hit the brakes hard, the nose is going to dive more, okay? So you're going to get more pitching of the car forward and backward when you get on power and when you get on the brakes. So it not only changes, how the car behaves while going over a bumpy surface on power or while going over a jump. It also is going to change how the car handles. Because when you get on the brakes, the nose will dive more. You're going to get more initial corner entry steering because there's more weight transfer forward if the nose dives more into braking. Okay. But all I did, literally, I just changed that insert there. I didn't have to buy new springs or do any of that crap. Just change the inserts. And that, at least for me, it fixed the problem. Now, it could be that, when I made this change and then I went to drive the truck again, it was on a, to be perfectly fair, it was on a different track with a different layout, and the jumps, of course, aren't exactly the same. Maybe the angle of the jump faces are such that I never would have had that problem even with the stock setup. But what I can say is, with that insert change, the truck, for me at least, it does drive a little bit better, more to my liking. And I do appear to have less of a nosediving problem going off of jumps just by changing that front insert there. Okay, so give that a try. If you're having the nosediving issue with this truck, you won't have to do any dremeling out of the chassis or run a larger pinion or, buy stiffer springs or any of that stuff. Just play around with actual geometry on the chassis, and that should solve the problem. Okay. So that's all I wanted to really mention here. I'm sorry it took over 11 minutes to do so. But it's a really interesting concept. This is something new that I'm learning to play with myself. A lot of the stuff that I've been playing with up to this point with my 1/10 scale chassis have been, camber gain, roll center, Ackerman, ride height, all the kind of usual stuff that you play with. And over time, you learn new tricks. So this is a new trick that I'm learning because this chassis and my Kyosho laser have all of these inserts for the inner hinge pins. And it's a whole new tuning option to change the way the car behaves on top of all of your usual bag of tricks. So play around with those things. They gave you those inserts for a reason. And certainly the stock setup, causes some nose dragging. So just change the insert on the front. You should be okay. All right. And that's it for now. So thanks for watching.